if I'm the acquisition entrepreneur, my aspiration is to take some investor capital, deploy that into an acquisition, run and grow the business for about 5 to 7 years, exit it and give the investors a 35% plus IRR and take away 25% of the equity.
All right, Pete, thank you so much for chatting to me today. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, kind of preparing as we went through this, and you're listed as the co-owner or non-exec director of, I think it was something like 10 companies on your LinkedIn. You've got 8 on your website. I'm not sure the exact number. But I mean,
How does that work?
yeah, exactly. The first thought that comes to mind is, aren't you spinning plates all day? I mean, explain to me how you manage with all of that and kind of the model behind this whole ETA and acquisition entrepreneurship thing.
Sure. So I'll start with first of all, thanks for having me. Always great to chat, and always very happy to chat about anything about acquisition entrepreneurship. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with that first question around the juggle or the plate spinning. I think is a good one. I use plate spinning a lot. Juggling is a bit different. Juggling implies that it's kind of binary. You either catch the ball or you drop it, whereas plate spinning is a little bit more about momentum. Like you run over to that plate, you spin it a bit and it keeps running for a little while, and then you spin this one and this one slows down, so you got to run over there. Like, I think that's a good analogy for kind of having multiple businesses or kind of projects on at the same time. So how do I spread myself across all of that? Pretty deliberately, and I try to be very clear about how much time I'm intentionally spending on each of those, because it's not the same. So I'm currently sitting here in Brisbane in the head office of SRO Technology, which is the first business that I bought with a mate of mine back in 2013. And across the board, I probably spend most of my time with this business. But when I say most, that's a couple of days a week. Across the rest of the businesses, there are some where I might sit on the board and spend a day a month of time and energy on that. Usually that's a cumulative day, because it'll be, a couple of emails each week, a couple of phone calls. Maybe it's a board meeting that might be kind of 3 hours in terms of prep and execution, but aggregated over the month, it might be a day. There are others that might still be a non-exec board position, but because of whatever happens to be going on in that business at that time, I'm leaning in a little bit further to sit alongside the CEO and help them with something. So it might be, 3 days a month for a period of time on that particular business. So that's, your spinning plates concept is a really good one, because you kind of need to move around depending on what's required. And equally with SRO up here, like, I say a couple of days a week. There are some weeks when it's 5 days. There are other weeks when it's a couple of hours. So it really is a juggle. I definitely do my best in my calendar to have kind of time blocked on a reasonable cadence for each of those things, but that always pretty quickly goes out the window depending on what's happening. I mean, even today, like I was 5 minutes late to kicking this off, and that was because, things happen earlier during the day that kind of send me off course and kind of start bumping into other meetings. I mean, I had another meeting that was an hour long today that I just had to completely delete because there was other things that consume that time. So you need to stay pretty agile. You also, I think, need to be very clear about segmenting your brain space. So I read years and years ago now, actually, but I read the Bill Clinton autobiography, and he was obviously and still is, quite a colourful character and well known for things that probably he wished he wasn't well known for. But that one of the things that he thought was one of his superpowers was his ability to very, very clearly delineate his brain space. So, and the story that he told at one point was he was in Camp David and he was trying to, on one hand, negotiate something to do with the Middle East. On the other hand, try and negotiate something to do with some internal policy, like Senate election, something internal to the USA. And on the third point, he was defending himself against the Monica Lewinsky case. And he was in Camp David and he had people representing each of those 3 problems in 3 separate rooms on the same evening. So he had the 2 people from the Middle East negotiating in this room. He had, the political advisors in that room, and he had his lawyers in the other room. And he thought that that was a really good way to bring to life how he thinks about things in his mind. As soon as he walked into the door to talk about the Middle East and shut the door behind him, everything else disappeared. And all he thought about was that issue. And then when he walked out into the hallway and shut the door behind him, that issue was then out of his mind and he was on to the next issue. I think I'm definitely not at that level of being able to completely clear my mind of anything that I'm not in, but it's that whole concept of being mindful, present moment oriented. And, right now I'm sitting in a conversation with you, doing my best to make sure I'm really focused on trying to respond to the questions that you're asking and have a great conversation here. Either side of this meeting, I've got issues with multiple businesses that I'm going to have to jump into those meetings on. So in order for me to be effective, continuing to strengthen that muscle around staying in the present moment with the issue and the people that I'm dealing with at the time, I think is something that I'm continuing to learn and strengthen. So yeah, there's no kind of secret 10-step methodology to juggling, 6 board positions and 10 investments and, all that sort of stuff. I think it really is just about doing your best each week and each day to be pretty intentional about how you're spending your time and where you're focusing your mind.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, from a practical perspective, because I know sort of a lot of people in, I suppose, the ETA space, I kind of hear it a lot on Will Smith's Acquiring Mind podcast that you were also on. The expectation is that you can kind of just buy a business, stick a CEO in there, and then sort of be hands off and kind of go about your day. How do you actually transition to a point like, so you've bought a business? How do you get to the point where there is a CEO actually in place running it, and sort of you are just putting in your 1 day a month, for example, and kind of how do we reconcile the fact that people are saying that that's not?
So yeah, so I'd say that my first answer to that question is that it's not possible, right? So
Right.
I'd use that as the starting point. So it's almost like, what's the null hypothesis here? Like, do you assume that you should be able to, or do you assume that you can't? I would start by assuming that you can't. It doesn't mean that it's impossible, but I think if you start with the assumption that you can, you won't give it the right respect. So you should start with the assumption that it's impossible to buy a business and then just like dump a CEO in there and then step back and watch the dividends flow, right? Like, you should assume that that's impossible. So then you go in there on the assumption that you're going to be stuck running that business for a long period of time. Once you're in there, absolutely, you should be doing everything that you can to learn each element of the business and then sequentially make yourself redundant from that process. And there's 2 reasons for that. One reason is that in order for any business to grow, even if you're going to stay the leader, you need to work out how to make yourself redundant. One of the biggest constraints to, and I was actually talking to one of the managers here about it just yesterday, because he's currently in the process of reading a book about delegation. And we were heading to the pub to grab lunch, and I jumped in the passenger seat and the book was there. And I said, oh, this looks like a very good topic. And the reason why is my view is that most small businesses that are owned by, let's call it baby boomers that have founded it years ago and are still running it today, if those businesses haven't scaled to a material size, the most likely reason is a lack of ability to delegate. For some reason, they haven't been able to delegate properly. They haven't been able to grow their team as a result. And therefore, they've stuck at a particular glass ceiling level, which is why you end up with all these businesses that have this kind of sub $50 million revenue, is because probably lower than that, like somewhere around about the $20 or $30 million revenue mark, there's this glass ceiling where in order to break through to that next level, you really do need to build a strong executive bench. And you can't do that if you're not willing to delegate. So I think the step one, the reason why it's so important to learn how to make yourself redundant is because you will only be able to grow a business if you can learn how to do that. Step 2, the reason why it's so important to learn how to make yourself redundant is if you ever want to become non-executive in that business, you absolutely need to learn how to make yourself redundant. And that's not as simple as recruiting someone to replace you. That's a Band-Aid solution, because the other thing that you see often in small businesses is you'll have a business owner that will say, oh yeah, someone told me that if I want to retire, I need to recruit a general manager or I need to recruit a CEO. So then they do, easy.
Yeah.
Like put up an ad recruit a general manager, put them in the seat. Now let's ignore all of the risks associated with trying to select the right person for the role and all that sort of stuff. Ignore all of that. Just say you have the right person for the role and they start and blah, blah, blah. They're in the seat. From that day, the owner still needs to know how to delegate to that person. And often you'll find scenarios where you've got the owner, they've recruited the capable general manager or CEO. They've either failed to delegate or they've delegated and then kind of white-anted. 12 months later, either the CEO leaves or the owner sacks them. And everyone's like, what happened? And the owner says, oh, they just weren't good enough. They couldn't do it. They just couldn't do the job, right? And that's not the case. The case is they didn't do exactly what they were told to do, and they didn't follow exact instructions to run the business exactly the same way that the old owner used to. But you never want them to do that, right? If you've recruited a new leader to take your business to the next horizon, of course they're going to have to do stuff differently to the way that you did it, not least of which just because they're a different person. So yeah, I think the delegation thing, I mean, your question around, there's a lot of discussion about, buy a business, drop in a general manager or CEO. My answer to that question is no. I would start with the assumption you can't and then work hard to work out how to make it happen rather than the other way around, because then at least you're going in there with some honesty. And then I think that in my experience, the way, if you look at the various trajectories that the businesses I've had have been on, like SRO, where I am today, we bought that back in 2013 and I dropped in to run it. It was very small back then. I ran it for maybe 4 years and grew it a bit. And in that time, recruited a few key people and then made myself redundant, promoted one of those people from within to become the CEO and stepped back into a non-executive role. Then in the last couple of years, I've stepped back into a managing director role in a part-time basis. I didn't have to go back in full-time because I've got a really great leadership team in this business now, but it needed a little bit of what I can offer from a leadership and direction point of view. And so I'm in there filling some of those gaps, but I've got a great team that's continuously stepping up into those gaps that I'm trying to create for them. Another business I dropped in after we bought it in 2015. I ran that for about 2 years. And again, we actually ended up selling that before I made myself redundant from that role. But I think that it's not the underlying statement I'd make for people that are thinking about buying a small business and have an aspiration to not be involved in the day-to-day running of it is to assume that it's quite a journey to go from start to finish on that redundancy path.
Okay. And then with SRO, I mean, you mentioned 4 years you were a drop-in CEO, you were running it until you were out. If my research serves me right, you started buying other businesses before you were done being the CEO of SRO then.
Yeah.
How did you manage that? And when's the right time to start looking for the next one?
So we bought SRO in 2013 and we bought 3 more businesses in 2015. In 2015, I only jumped in to run one of them. But yeah, from 15 to 17, I was effectively running 2 businesses at the same time. And there was some overlap there. As part of that process, after getting the new one, that was also what kind of became a bit of the catalyst for me to step out of the CEO role in SRO for that period. But yeah, there was a period of time where I was running 2. Again, they were 2 still at the time relatively small businesses, but even if they're small, it doesn't mean they're any easier. Like running a business of 15 people can be just as hard as running a business of 150 people. And frankly, like the number of personal interactions you need to have in both situations is probably about the same, because by the time you're running 150 people, you probably still only have an executive team of, 6 people. And then they're worried about all of the other people more than you should need to be if you're delegating properly. So if you're running 15 people, again, you probably got an executive team of 3 or something. So there's not a big delta in terms of the complexity and time and effort and energy required between 15 and 150. There's just some nuances to like the issues you're facing and the way you need to spend your time. But yeah, there was a period of time where I was running 2 at the same time.
Gotcha. So then 10 plus acquisitions in now, are you still doing the same thing where you're a drop-in CEO or you find an operator before you complete the transaction?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So in around 2019, 2020, and I always have to clarify, not COVID driven at all, but just coincidentally around COVID times, was in a position where I kind of had capacity if I wanted to go and buy a business and drop in and run it. But for whatever reason, personal reasons, I had 2 young kids at the time, or, just appetite, just didn't feel like jumping into the CEO seat straight away again. I was looking for something else to put my time and energy into. And that's when I came across the concept of entrepreneurship through acquisition. Obviously, I had been an acquisition entrepreneur by fluke for the period leading up to that. I wasn't aware of the fact that it had a name, and there was, internationally, there was a bunch of stuff going on there, and the concept of a search fund and all that was new to me at that point. But I was keen to stay involved in businesses of the same size. I wanted to not be too far from the action. So I wanted to be able to be, close to the people who were in the hot seat, because I enjoyed that. And I loved the idea of being able to take some of what I'd learnt along the way and help those other people to fulfill those roles. And search funds and ETA were a perfect slot for me to drop in as an investor in that space, because that's actually, exactly the role that the investor plays, backing, supporting, coaching, mentoring those entrepreneurs to go through the search process, find a business to buy, do the negotiation and transaction, and then most importantly, sit in that CEO seat and work out how to drive the beast. So yeah, that was when I kind of started that process, started investing in acquisition entrepreneurs alongside other co-investors. And I've done that for the last, I guess that's now 7 years. And through that process, I think I've backed in the search phase at least kind of more than 20 entrepreneurs, if I add them all up. A handful of those were unsuccessful in finding a business to buy. A handful of those are still searching. And then there's about 10 of them, I think, who have completed their acquisitions and are in running their businesses as we speak. And some of those I sit on the board.
Okay, cool. And so for those guys, just from like a kind of deal structuring, investment raising perspective, how are those deals structured for them? What do they hope to end up with as a percentage of the business at the end of the whole exercise? And
Sure.
where do they
Yeah.
kind of see their cheese? Yeah.
Sure. So in answering that question, I'll use the traditional search fund model to describe it. And then most non-traditional search fund models have some kind of parallels to this core structure. But so in principle, if I'm the entrepreneur or the searcher in the search fund model, I don't have to invest any of my own capital into the equity of the transaction. I can if I want, but I don't have to. I would raise a small amount of money at the beginning of the search phase so that I can then quit my job and search full time. That small amount of money, might be in the $600,000 or $700,000 range, and should give me enough runway to last about 24 months of searching before completion of a deal. From that, I can draw a small salary. I can pay a few interns to do some research for me. I can do some due diligence. I can pay for some marketing and travel, and it gives me a little working budget to perform the search function. What happens at acquisition is that if I complete an acquisition, I get, and again, I'll describe this in terms of options, but from a tax perspective, there are various other structures that you can use that aren't options to create the same commercial outcome. But let's just call it options for now. I get 3 options. One option for 8 1/3% of the fully diluted equity gets granted on acquisition. So we complete the acquisition and I immediately get 8 1/3% of the equity. Over the subsequent 4 years, I get another 8 1/3%, kind of vesting annually along that period. So at the end of 4 years after completing an acquisition, I then have 16 2/3% of the equity. And then at the time when we sell the business, which on average over the last however many decades of this structure being in place is usually between 5 and 7 years post-acquisition, if the return to the investors who have put in capital exceeds 35% IRR, then I'll get another 8 1/3%, and my total exposure will be 25% of the equity. So now there's a bunch of detail in there around waterfall structures, investing, and like sliding scales and all that sort of stuff, but ignore all of that. Effectively, if I'm the acquisition entrepreneur, my aspiration is to take some investor capital, deploy that into an acquisition, run and grow the business for about 5 to 7 years, exit it and give the investors a 35% plus IRR and take away 25% of the equity.
Okay. And for guys that want to run this on their own, it's obviously extremely difficult. I know in Australia, in the US, there's the SBA, which kind of makes it a lot more accessible, at least deals
Yeah,
up
in
to
terms of
about 10.
funding it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. What are the options for people to fund a deal themselves? How difficult is that? Or is it really a matter of them coming up with cash? And I mean, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
probably a bank is going to be more confident working with you guys in conjunction with the
Yeah.
research entrepreneur,
So
right?
yeah. So there are very few deals that I would say, like a zero cash deal is usually going to be for a micro business.
Okay.
So I'm not saying they don't happen, but we're talking about like really, really small businesses, like, like a window cleaning business with the owner and two apprentices, right? Like you could probably do a zero cash deal on that and say to the guy, look, I'll take it on. You keep the debtors. I'll continue running the book. And over the next 12 months, I'll pay you X, right? And you take that money from earnings. And like there probably are some structures there that you could negotiate. But for any business of a material size, like I'm talking like, $500,000 to $1 million of earnings and above, it's very unlikely that you're going to get a zero cash up front kind of exposure or zero equity upfront exposure, unless there's something else at play or something else, frankly, going wrong that you're going to be in there to fix. Like you might find a business that's really struggling and you convince the owner that you can help them fix it and then you'll share the proceeds. That could work. But yeah, when we bought, me and my mate bought a few businesses, 10 or so years ago. We just had a bit of our own money saved up and then we took out some bank debt that was frankly secured against our houses. There's probably the most likely way that people are going to buy small businesses of any reasonable scale is going to be because they've got a little bit of savings up their sleeve. They've got a house with some available equity that they can draw down on, and they do a deal with the seller that means they might pay 60% upfront and 40% or 30% over, a year or two. That's more likely.
And these deals where, there's obviously a significant chunk of vendor finance or an earnout or whatever the case may be, what's sort of the sentiment amongst Australian sellers to actually get involved and do something like that, where they're kind of also risking their capital, or they're almost reinvesting in a sense in you?
So every deal that I've done in the last 15 years, and to put a number on that, it must be 15 to 20 deals that I've been directly involved with in that time, and plenty more that I've been aware of, have all had at least a 10 to 20% deferred amount, meaning like a committed but deferred payment, acting as some sort of security for post-acquisition issues, or probably more commonly, like absolutely an earnout calculation. So I know that there's a lot of sellers that want to say that they'll never do an earnout, but all the deals that I ever see get done have some kind of earnout in them. And I think that's because the sellers ultimately know that they can get a bigger number if they agree for that extra bit at the top to be a bit at risk. I have had one deal that I wasn't involved with, but I heard about someone else was running, where I can't remember the exact numbers, but just say it was, let's make it up. Let's say it was, the offer that they made was $4 million up front and a $1 million earnout that was going to be paid 12 months later. And the seller actually just said, I don't want the earnout. And the buyer said, oh, okay, so what are you thinking is the structure then? How much do you want up front? And he said, oh no, just the 4 million. Just don't worry about the extra one. And the buyer was like, what are you talking about? You've just given away something, because I was going to offer to pay you $1 million, even though it's at risk. Like, surely it's got to be worth at least $1. Yeah. And that seller was just like, I just don't want to, I want to go to the beach. So I don't even want the potential upside hanging on my back over that 12-month period. I just want you to pay me a check. I'm going to go to the beach. Right. So there are some sellers out there who are so averse to an earnout that they'll even sacrifice their total enterprise value to avoid the stress of it. Right. I often think about this. I've sold a couple of businesses, but I often think about for different businesses that I'm currently involved in owning, how I would feel about earnouts on the way out. And I still think when push comes to shove, if I was on the sell side, I would negotiate hard, assuming that there is an earnout, and make the earnout really lucrative for me. So I think the best
Okay.
way that sellers should think about earnouts is they should think really carefully about how, instead of just rejecting them, how they can negotiate that earnout to be structured in a way that allows them in that 12 months period to maximize their EV.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay. So the presumption then is that the owner is going to stay involved throughout the earnout period, right?
So again, depends. So there are some structures that does assume that the owner is going to stay involved in some kind of executive capacity after completion, and usually as a buyer, I would only accept that in a meaningful way if there was something meaningful in it for them on the upside with the earnout, and I thought that they were actually really going to do a good job. The other problem that often we see, whether it's 3 months or 6 months down the track post completion, the sellers, and absolutely no judgment, I'd probably be the same, the sellers get a little bit disengaged, right? So the sellers actually just, you've got to, it's like if you sold your house, but then you stayed there when the new owners moved in, right? And you had to live there
Right.
and watch them retile the bathroom and, pull out the landscaping that you just did and realign the driveway. Like, it's kind of hard to watch, I think, if you've,
Yeah.
run a business in a certain way for such a long time and you watch someone come in and, change direction on a bunch of stuff that's probably all valid, probably all necessary to grow to the next level. But I think sellers often find that quite hard to watch. So getting a seller to stay around in a meaningful way for a long period of time, I think is understandably challenging.
Okay. And in that case, I mean, you're looking at totally different, or what is quite different businesses. You're not really taking the kind of roll up approach where, someone goes and buys a series of very closely related businesses and kind of runs them all centrally under the same SOPs. Given that, what makes a good deal for you guys, just because you're kind of going into it knowing that everything is going to be totally different from what you've seen in the past?
So I guess two answers to that question. One is with the concept of investing in ETA, you really are focusing on the entrepreneur first, right? So the first kind of decision that an ETA investor makes is, do I like this entrepreneur? Do I think they'll be a good operator? Am I willing to back them? Do I think that they can learn to become a great CEO? Not do I think they're already a great CEO, but do I think they've got what it takes to become that? Do they have the grit, the coachability, the leadership skills, the problem solving in order to get there? So that first question, if you answer that right, then in terms of industry sector and business type, your next challenge isn't to find a business that you like or a business that you think is necessarily in a target sector. Your challenge is to then find a business that's going to be best suited to that entrepreneur. So the fit between the entrepreneur and the business is going to be a massive lever for value creation. So that then leads you down a whole bunch of different paths in terms of industry vertical. But your next comment about how do you go into all these different businesses knowing that they're all going to be so different. One of the other comments I often make is that almost all small businesses taste like chicken. And what I mean by that is they all taste the same. That, like, they all have the same problems. So, I mean, we talked about delegation just before. Like, delegation is a common problem across every single small bit. I mean, it's probably a common problem across every single big business as well, but it's definitely a common problem across every small business is the ability to delegate, and the ability to delegate in a productive way, and the impact that has on the constraint to growth across these sectors. So usually when you go in and buy it, doesn't matter whether you bought a business in sector A, B, or C, that you'll find that common thread. There'll be some issue with the historic delegation to the team that's already embedded in there, and you'll need to go through a process to work out, okay, what happens when I unlock this team? What happens when I start delegating to them? Who are the people that start to step up? Who are the people that freak out? Like, how do I then reconstruct a team around an environment of delegation instead of an environment of control? And that happens every single time. So that absolutely terrible systems and processes. They'll still be paper-based. They'll still be hyper complex. They'll still be multi-level controlled when you only need key control. There'll be a lot of isolation and concentration around key people. So systems and processes, and just looking at the business machine and how it operates, again, common. Doesn't matter whether you've bought in any sector, businesses of this size and type will have some element of that problem. And then the third thing that I would say, and it sounds really strange, but just speaking to the customer. Like, I think, and understandably so, every single small business owner would say that they're absolutely dedicated to customer service and they speak to their customer all the time and all that sort of stuff. More often than not, they're not really speaking to the customer. You know, like that. I can't remember which way around it is, but like, it's like, you might be listening, but you're not hearing me, or you might be able to hear me, but you're not listening. Like, I can't remember which one of those it is, but like that's the kind of relationship that typically you find these businesses have with their customer. Like, you know, they're listening, but they're not really hearing them in both directions. So speaking to the customer as a broad heading is another very, very common piece of low-hanging fruit in these businesses. And that could be anything from systematically actually having a CRM to actually identifying who are your top 10 customers and actually building a relationship with the key people in those organizations or the key people in that group. Or even, I mean, I've got businesses that have, you know, tens of thousands of discrete customers because they're B2C. So obviously you're not going to go and speak to 10,000 people, but like the speak to the customer piece in that is like, do you have a good web presence? Do you have good customer service? Do you have really good, like, you know, brochures and manuals and communication techniques? Like, have you got a good social presence? Like, that's still speak to the customer in a way that the previous owners never did. So yeah, I think that there are specific nuances to every single sector and every single business and every single like business in the supply chain of a single sector and all that sort of stuff. So I'm definitely not downplaying the fact that those specializations and those technical aspects matter, but I think you can learn that along the way. Like you don't need to know that in detail going in, because if you're buying a business that is hopefully worth what you're paying for it, there's enough corporate knowledge or team knowledge in there that you can lean on whilst you learn it. But the things that you can do to help the business and actually also help to unlock some of that over time is probably those three things. So it's delegate and build a team. It's fix the back office and the systems and processes, the business machine, which has probably never been built, and speak to the customer.
Okay, cool. And so then for an entrepreneur that's kind of listening to this and getting excited about everything that you're talking about, how do they know if they're the right ones to reach out to someone like you, or to then go and start approaching search funds to do one of these funded searches? Because I mean, again, from what I've seen in the ETA space, at least in Australia and the US, it seems heavily weighted to guys that have MBAs. They go out, they go to Melbourne Business School, and then they're like, okay, now I can go and approach these guys and do a backed search. What about the guys, like I don't even have a degree, right? But I've run a couple of different businesses, and, you know, they've all done multiple millions of dollars. How about that? And then how about the guys that, you know, earlier stage than that even?
Yeah, so you're right. Like the search fund model was established in Stanford and Harvard back in the 80s, and what that model itself was built by professors leading and, you know, training MBA students. So it makes sense that definitely in that market, but also in other markets globally, a lot of the momentum has come from MBA schools and from MBA graduates. In the Australian market, I mean, MBS is doing a fantastic job, and definitely in the last 12 months has really upped its game supporting this part of the market. But historically, Australia has had no business school support for the ETA space. There are no, even MBS, whilst there, you name it, if you go and do an MBA there, you can major in entrepreneurship through acquisition, right? So they have dedicated streams that are pumping out people in this space. But so in Australia, like, there's obviously been people, I mean, I'm one of them, who have been buying small businesses and then growing them like forever, right? Like, that's not saying new. I think it's the community that's new. And that community like came about because there was this common language built by search funds that made it possible. But that doesn't mean that search funds are the only way of doing it. And it also doesn't mean that getting an MBA is the only way to to get access to it either. When people ask me like, what does a good acquisition entrepreneur look like? I kind of start by saying there's like a threshold criteria where you do need to have a certain, let's call it, level of intellect, right? Like you need to be able to add up and write sentences and communicate and solve problems. And you need to have some level of aptitude, right? It's not an unskilled labor job, right? So, and yes, you could demonstrate that by saying, hey, I've got an MBA. So if I've got an MBA from Melbourne Business School or Harvard or whatever, like clearly you've got a level of intelligence that means you can solve those problems, right? So it might be that, it might be a postgrad, it might be neither of those things. You might actually just say, yeah, I went to this high school in, Western Sydney, but then I founded these 3 businesses and I managed to build teams that are this size and solve these problems. And, like all of that demonstrates that your brain has a certain amount of capacity and capability in it that is like a minimum threshold to not only tackle this challenge, but definitely required in order to attract that capital. Like you're asking people to put money behind you, they need to know they're putting it behind a machine of some capacity, right? But that to me is like table stakes. That's like, great, you've got the capacity. The next layer that is actually a differentiating factor is all of the non-intellectual stuff. Like the first one is grit. Like, can you deal with shit on a day in, day out basis? Like, can you turn up to work one day and ride the emotional roller coaster of like massive highs and massive lows? Can you be dealt with, really shit situations and just grind through it? Like that real grit, like this is not an easy path. And you need to know that you've got the grit to show up each day and like really put your shoulder into it. So there's the grit piece. I think the next one is this coachability thing that a lot of ETA investors talk about. And for me, I think that's important for a number of reasons. I think it's important for the person that's embarking on it because they need to recognize that something they haven't done before. So if you're doing something you haven't done before, you need to be ready to learn. I think it's also important for, frankly, the returns for both the entrepreneur and the investors. One of the features, the attributes of this model is that it should extract value from the investor group, not just capital, but experience and training and coaching and mentoring. You can't extract that if you're not coachable. So it doesn't matter how good these investors are that you've got around you that are there to help you along your journey, not just with money, but also with network and expertise and blah, blah, blah. You'll get zero if you're not open to being coached, right? So it's actually like a fundamental requirement of the investment returns that the entrepreneur has the ability to take on that coaching and improve as a result. So I think coachability is really important. And then I think people skills, like just all of these businesses are built on people, whether that be like a very low headcount business that means you need to spend a lot of time dealing with customers or suppliers, or big headcount business like services businesses that need you to navigate a whole bunch of personalities. If you're not a people person, it's going to be tough. And it doesn't mean you need to be some gregarious extrovert that loves jumping up and down the stage or giving big emotional speeches or whatever. You just need to be the kind of person that's willing to acknowledge that investing time in the people matters, regardless of what that looks like for you. Everyone's different. But if you're just the kind of person that's like, I just can't be bothered dealing with people, I just want to do my job, like it's probably not going to work because a lot of it's going to be dealing with people. And probably then the fourth thing, which is kind of a combination of all of that, is just problem solving. Like if constantly being faced with problems that you've never faced before is frustrating for you, then don't do this. Like,
Right.
yeah, if solving unique problems on a daily basis excites you, then great, have a crack.
And what should these guys expect in terms of lifestyle? I mean, is it going to be 100-hour weeks, at least in the beginning, or when the acquisition is first made, or what are we looking at here? Because presumably they're being paid a salary at the end of the day. It's not like someone started their own business and is taking whatever they want
paid
out
a
of it.
salary. Yeah, they get paid a salary, and it's a reasonable salary for the job they're doing. It might not be the kind of salary they could get elsewhere, but it's a reasonable salary for the job they're doing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's not
For sure.
you don't really count the hours because you never know when they're coming. Like you'll be spending, 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon and then 2 hours at, 3 a.m. on Monday morning. And then you'll have Wednesday afternoon off because there was nothing happening and you took the opportunity to go to the beach for a swim, right? Like because you're trying to manage your energy load and your workload, right? But like it probably aggregates to a large number of hours. But equally, you kind of want to be the person, and investors want to back the person that kind of is inspired by that. You want the person that's happily, not because they're stressed, but happily falling to sleep thinking about the next product they're going to develop or how they're going to solve that problem next week with that customer, or like if it's constantly kind of bubbling around your mind in a positive way, that's a great sign. And I don't think you need to hold yourself back from, like, I don't know that, work-life balance isn't really a thing. I think it's more like a blend, like it's all one thing. It's all just life. So yeah, there's a lot of work involved, a lot of hours involved, but like you hope that you're getting into it because you want to find something that you really want to do. And the whole point of it is you're becoming a business owner, you're having the autonomy, you're like engaged in it, you're directly involved in the outcomes. Like, so all of that highly engaging stuff should mean that you're not necessarily, you probably more need to manage your energy levels to hold yourself back from doing more of the stuff you're just loving doing rather than, just getting burnt out by being ground into the pavement.
Great. Okay. And so just on, I guess, a bit of a closing note and a final conversational topic, because we've been speaking very conceptually up until this point. We haven't really talked much about you and your experience with the
Yeah.
first few businesses that you bought. I mean, we just kind of went with it. So how was the experience? I mean, day one after you buy this first business, as you said, you did it, saved up a bunch of cash with you and, your partner, went to the banks, signed your
Yeah.
homes.
Yeah.
You step in on day one, then what happens? How did it go?
Yeah. So I try to look for opportunities to tell this story so I won't forget it, because like it's been a while now, and the business that I'm sitting in now, which is the same entity, but it's a very different business than what it was when we bought it. So I want to make sure I don't forget too much of what the real reality was like. But so when we first bought SRO, it was based in Miranda, South Sydney, and it was on a street called Kamala Road, and it was a light industrial park. And I reckon, I can't remember the exact stats, but it probably would have been, I don't know, 50 to 60 square meters of office space and maybe 150 square meters of warehouse space, little mezzanine office over a single garage door warehouse. We had the employees were me now, because I added myself, the owner and his wife, two technicians, an apprentice, and a lady that helped with the office admin. So pretty quickly after that, the owner and his wife kind of retired. The apprentice left, and so then it was me, two technicians, and the office lady, and so there, yeah. So on day one when I walked in, the old owner still had his desk set up at the end of the office, which took up the whole end of the office, and he had a little kind of secondhand IKEA student desk in the corner that I sat at because I wasn't allowed the big desk. He was going to keep the big desk, and yeah, just got to work basically. Like, so I just started doing things like, I would say, okay, so, I mean, at that point, we were still getting requests for quotation, like on the fax machine. So the quote requests would come in on the fax machine. We'd write up the quote, we'd fax it back to them. So like I did things like at that point, I called Telstra and worked out how to connect that fax line to an automated email address. So instead of having to have a fax machine, we'd receive their faxes as a PDF attached to an email.
Right.
I then did things like migrated from whatever they had, some office system, to the Google Suite. So then we could have like remote access to our files and everyone could share them. They then had this job order book where like every single time we got a new purchase order, which would come in on the fax machine, they would write in this pre-printed table by hand, like the purchase order number, the description of the job, the value, and the customer. And so I like moved that onto Google Sheets and started tracking it on Google Sheets. The owner said, I don't care what you do with sheets, but you're keeping that book in the office. So we had to then run a dual system of the handwritten purchase orders until he left, and then I could chuck that in the bin and use Google Sheets. Yeah, like it was really pretty kind of fundamental agricultural stuff. I would go out to sites with the technicians where there was a 2-man job and carry weights for them. We do it with a measurement instrument business. So to calibrate the instruments, you need to kind of put like known weights on. And so like I wasn't qualified in whatever they were doing, but I could carry stuff. So I would carry weights around site up conveyor belts and kind of help them with that stuff. I'd go and visit customers and kind of learn a bit about what they were doing and try and, sell stuff to them. Yeah. And then it probably would have been 6 months in. I probably recruited my first technician probably in the first 6 months and had no idea what I was doing really, because I didn't know what kind of person would be a good technician or what wouldn't be a good technician. I just kind of put up an ad and then had a crack, see who I could find.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, like it's, I moved us from account write, MYOB account write to MYOB account write in the cloud. That was novel for them that you could actually remotely access your accounting information. We started doing month-end accounts, which they never did before. I started actually kind of every single time they issued a quote, they never took record of it. So I said to them, okay, each time you issue a quote, can you tell me so I can like make a register of all the quotes we've issued and start, I don't know, crazy talk, but start following up the quotes you've issued. So, and somehow, surprise, surprise, after following up quotes they'd issued, we managed to increase our sales. So yeah, like it really is that stuff. Like in this, like today versus back then, the technology has obviously moved on a lot, but not materially. I mean, back in 2013, like there was still like enough systems that they didn't need all those paper systems. But I mean, I was just involved in the acquisition of not a small business just 2 months ago, and their entire sales and purchasing process still on paper. Paper in trays, this desk to this desk, fill it out by hand, put a stamp on it, take it down to the factory floor, like all still paper based. And that's what I mean about it all tastes like chicken. Like you just got to get in there and roll up your sleeves, look for the next piece of low hanging fruit and pick it. It probably was 18 or 24 months before I started having enough moving parts that I could start thinking about, okay, what's the next evolution of growth here? Is there another product we need to sell? Is there a new kind of customer group that we need to approach? But it's all very organic. And I don't think that anything is very different to that. Like there was another business just here, Southeast Queensland, that I was involved in the acquisition of just recently. And that again, like quite a well-established like larger business. But I would suggest I haven't been like under the hood on that in any detail yet, but I'd guess that what they're working through now is not too dissimilar. Often the systems that and people and structures and processes that these people are working on have been the same for quite a long time. And again, that's because these owners are typically running it because they know how to run it that way. I mean, I did a post on LinkedIn just recently where I made the analogy of a vintage car. And, if you go to buy a vintage car and the old owner is driving it around, it looks perfect. And then you jump in and it's terrible to drive. It's terrible to drive because there's some stuff that needs to be fixed, but the owner had worked out how to work around it, right? So they worked out how to make that engine hum, even though the gear stick wasn't right and the brakes don't work and the whatever, but it's natural to them because that's how they've run it for the last 10 years, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't know what aspect you're interested in terms of the post-acquisition, but I think my overall summary is that again, I think a misconception, like at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about people buying businesses either for zero down, let's ignore that, or like, yeah, I'll buy a business and I'll put in a CEO. I think another misconception is people say, buy a business and then I'll implement all these strategic initiatives. Like that's, like you got to take a breath, right? That's going to take some time.
Yeah.
Like before you can implement any strategy, you need to fix the foundation, and fixing that foundation is actually trying to rebuild the plane in flight so it's ready to then grow.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing from a lot of this conversation is you're really focusing on oiling the gears, as opposed to, you haven't really touched much on, sales and marketing and new customer acquisition and things like that. I mean, with these boomer businesses, are they typically, once you fix and oil those gears, they kind of just organically grow with time? Or is it Because
So,
I come from a marketing background where the marketing and sales, you're hustling business, and it's
yeah.
all about just
So,
bringing new customers in the door.
yeah. So I think, yeah, definitely a big attribute of these types of businesses is they've got, and particularly if you find the right ones, they've got really loyal, sticky customer base. Whether or not that's contracted doesn't matter. They've got a sticky customer base that's been working with them for years, and they just continue to issue the purchase orders off the same approach that they have forever. So, so definitely there's good momentum there and good cash flow there. I think that you unlock a significant amount of latent growth by fixing the machine without having to put your foot on the accelerator. And so what usually happens in the first period is to your comment, you grease a few of those wheels, fix a few of those gears, recalibrate the alignment of some of this stuff in the machine. Just by unlocking that bit, you create growth, because suddenly all the things that are just slipping through the cracks or are taking longer than they should get caught and go quicker. And that creates growth. And you haven't actually changed anything. You're just catching the customers that you were already catching, but you're just doing them better than you were before, right? And so you get your first kick just out of just unlocking some of that latent potential. And then it's after that, which is probably a couple of years down the track, where because then what happens is you unlock that latent potential. It starts to grow. It sucks in working capital. And then suddenly you're recruiting again, or having to fix your tech stack, or so again, you're not then on the how do we grow our customer front, because you're actually just trying to keep up with this kind of growth you've unlocked by fixing the machine, right? So you get these kind of few little cycles in the couple of years post acquisition where you don't have to spend a whole bunch of time looking for aggressive growth at the top line, because it's just kind of in there, inherent in the machine. It's probably only, I don't know, every business is different, but based on the ones that I've done and based on the ones that I've seen elsewhere in the market, it's probably only a few years in where you really need to then think, okay, this thing has gone, it's kicked up a bit, but now it's starting to stabilize again. And then you're like, oh, okay, now we've found its natural rhythm. We can then go and look for customer acquisition, marketing, growth, all that sort of stuff. But that you might as well wait until it's expanded to its inherent potential before you bother trying to pump more in the top. Let it naturally grow to its current limits before you invest in excess.
Absolutely.
And you'll find that point.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Pete. I really appreciate you coming on, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. For people that want to reach out to you or that want to get into all of this, how can they find you, and what's the best place to start?
Totally. So, I mean, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so they should be able to find my profile there, and feel free to send me a DM or whatever if you want to chat. I'm happy to chat and help people understand how to navigate the space. The other thing I'd strongly recommend is to join the ETA Central community. So etacentral.com.au, and it's free to join. And so if you sign up there, you'll get all of the information about who's in the market. We've got about 900 members now, I think. But also on there, we're posting all of the in-person events. So for example, you mentioned MBS. So they're often running events down in Melbourne, and those will be posted on ETA Central. And we've got the annual ETA forum in Sydney coming up in October. And so that's a perfect event for anyone wanting to get across very, very quickly, connect with everyone in the community at the one event. But yeah, so I'd definitely join ETA Central in order to just stay plugged into what's happening. And then just reach out to, there's a whole bunch of people like me in that community that have been kind of swimming in this space for a little while and have some really, great stuff to share. So I just network hard.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, no problem. It was great to speak to you.